There we go. Now my mic's on. Hi. Let's go ahead and get going here. I've got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about today. Before that, though, just a couple of announcements. I'm almost done. We're almost done grading homework 1. There's just a few left that we have to do. Several people used their extensions, so we had to go back and take a look at those. But hoping by Thursday at the absolute latest, those will be graded and posted. For the most part, I've graded several of them myself. For the most part, they've all been very good. So for the most part, there's no reason to be concerned about those grades. But I do want to get them back to you sooner rather than later. So I'm going to try really hard to get those finished up and back to you by Thursday. I feel like there was something else that I was supposed to remind you about, but I don't remember what it is. I'm actually feeling like a hot pile of garbage right now, so please bear with me today. I've been sick for days, so I'm trying as hard as I can. But if I seem a little loopy, you guys are gonna have to help me out, I guess is what I'm saying today. I'm gonna forget stuff. I'm gonna space stuff out, but we'll get through it as best as we can. Does anybody have any questions about the homework assignment or any other stuff before we hop into today's topic? All right, cool. So we're going to talk about something really cool today, actually. We're going to talk about a platform called Firebase. So Firebase is a development platform. It's been around for not quite 10 years. So it's been around for a little while, and a few years ago, I want to say like 2016, Google bought them. They bought Firebase. They started out as a messaging company. They just wanted to make an easy way to send messages across different platforms, iPhone and Android and web apps and things like that. But they discovered that people were using their messaging capabilities for all kinds of things, not just messaging. And so they said, well, there's a real need here for those kinds of services. Let's make those kinds of services accessible to everybody. So the main idea is there's a lot of stuff that if you're making apps is pretty common to see. I mean, we've all seen the common features across different apps. And so the idea here is, well, we don't have to sit down and redo that stuff every single time. This is a development platform that does a lot of common functionality that I can drop into my app, and it automatically takes care of those common features, leaving me as a developer to worry about everything else, which is probably the more exciting part of my app anyway. That's the idea. It also is cross-platform, so it does work on iPhones. We don't care about iPhones in this class, but still, it works on iPhones. It even works on websites, so you can do cross-platform stuff with this as well. So there's a lot of different tools that they offer. We're not going to talk about all these. We don't have time to talk about all these different things. I'm just going to focus on 3 of them today. You'll actually see the same 3 pop up in the studio on Thursday is the plan. Although it might only be 2. We'll see how that turns out. But just a quick rundown of some of the things that it can do, right? There's an analytics package that you can drop into your app to see not just how many people are using it, but which parts of the app are they actually using? How are they interacting with various parts of the app? So it displays a bunch of data about that. The messaging, of course, that's where they started. So if you want to have the capability of sending messages from one user to the next, you can drop that into your app and it's ready to go. It's all baked in. Authorization, so basically just logins, which these days can take various forms. So it's not just creating accounts, but also maybe linking it to your Facebook account or linking it to your Google account or linking it to whatever account you want to link it to, right? That's all part of authorization these days. Storage is used for user-generated content. So think things like pictures, videos, right? Anything that you would upload to Facebook, right? That's sort of what falls under that umbrella of storage. So it's specifically user-generated content, whereas Firestore, may sound very similar, is a database. It's a database as a service. So we actually talked about databases just last week, as a matter of fact. We're going to talk about databases more today. I hope that's not going to be too terribly confusing for you since you're working on the the homework assignment, but just to make it 100% absolutely clear, you should use SQLite on the homework assignment, not the database that we're talking about today. That'll be something different, something down the line. And they're useful for different purposes too, as a matter of fact. We'll talk about that a little bit when we get to it. You can do hosting, so like web hosting kinds of things. There's a machine learning package, which I'm actually very interested in, but I have very little experience with. That could be a cool thing to play around with someday. And then performance. Monitor the performance of your application so that you can try to improve it. And this is not even a complete list. There's other stuff on here. They do advertising. They do other kinds of common things that you see across applications as well. But the idea here is that these are all common components. Lots of apps use this kind of stuff. So instead of everybody having to write their own version, let's save some time and just drop in an already working version into our apps. So we're going to focus on 3 of them today. We're going to do a little coding today as well. I've got 3 different apps. I've got one to show off authorization and storage, and then the Firestore. So those 3 in the middle there, we're going to take a look at all 3 of them, hopefully, if we have enough time. All right. Let's start with what I think is probably the easiest one, authentication. It's probably the easiest one. So it's just various ways of signing in. If you're interested in having user accounts for your application, you can use this authentication module to govern that process of signing into your app. You can have users create their own accounts by using emails and passwords, or you can hook into the usual suspects if you want to tie it to a Facebook account, a Google account, whatever. The kinds of things that you get when you use this are things like email validation. Could we validate emails ourselves? Sure, yeah, absolutely. But why, right? It's such a common task. Same with the next one on the list, password hashing. That's used for security, so that I'm not storing your password directly in the database. I'm storing the hashed version in the database. Can we do that ourselves? Yes, absolutely. A good security class. Actually, it's one of the first things that you probably learn about security, right? It's how to hash passwords. We could do it ourselves, but there's no need. We can use this module and it will take care of hashing passwords for us. Detecting duplicate accounts, other things like that that have to do with account management in your app. We don't have to worry about that stuff. We can just drop this authentication module in and let it take care of the rest. So what I want to do is I've actually got an app. It's a very, 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 very simple app. Basically, it lets you create an account by providing an email and password, and then lets you log into and out of that account. That's it. That's all it does. It's just meant to show off how the authentication module works. So what I want to do is take a look at that app a little bit and code some of it up, show you what some of the code for that app looks like, so that if you decide you want to use it in your project, for example, you'll have an idea of how it works. So let's see. I can't actually run the app right now. It's incomplete. Well, I might be able to run it, but it won't work. Let's see how far I can get, actually. But just as a basic overview of what this thing does, there's a Java version and a Kotlin version, actually, but we're going to do the Kotlin version. And then it asks you what kind of login you want to use. So I can choose a Google login if I want, choose a Facebook login if I want, but I'm going to stick with the traditional email and password login. Oh, I'm signed in. Oh wait, that's from when I was testing it before class. I was going to say, how could that even happen? It's still loading up. And so this is good enough, though, for our purposes, right? If I want to, I can fill in my email and a password and create an account. Or if I already have an account, I can fill in my email and my password and I can sign in. And it will verify that the password matches, right, and sign me in. I can also do things like send an email verification. It's like sometimes when you log in, you want them to verify that their email address is what they say it is, right? It has a mechanism for that as well. So let's take a look at some of those basic functionalities. I'm not going to go much over the UI stuff today. That's not the goal. I'm going to hop into this email password activity in this app and start up. at the top and kind of go through and fill in the missing pieces to show you how this authentication module works. So if we start up here at the top, this is where we get access to Firebase, right? I'll show you actually, I skipped a very major step that I'm going to show you actually at the end of class, which is how do I add Firebase to my Gradle to make sure that I get all the dependencies and things like that. I'll show you that at the end. What I need to do, if I take a look, what's going on? It's frozen. Come back. So the code's already in here to set up all the UI stuff. Again, I'm not concerned about the UI stuff, but what I do want to do is the Firebase related stuff. And so there's a comment here that says, I need to initialize the Firebase authentication module. That's a one-liner. I'm going to take this auth variable, which I have an instance variable for up here. I'm just going to take this authentication variable and grab the Firebase authentication. It even knows what I want to do. Firebase auth.getInstance. This is going to provide us access to the Firebase authentication module, allow us to call the methods that we need to perform the authentication tasks. So those tasks actually take place a little bit later on. There's a listener for the various buttons. So this is a listener for when I click the Create Account button. So they filled in the email address and the password that they want to use for their account, and they've clicked the Create Account button. How do I set this up? How do I make this happen? Well, you can see some of it's already been started for us, but there's nothing that uses Firebase yet. So we're going to come down here and start filling in code. This is kind of a big chunk of code, but it's actually not terribly complicated. But I'm going to type it out so that we can walk through it step by step, make sure we understand what's happening. I'm going to start with my authentication variable, the one that we just initialized up in the creation. And there's a method, create user with email and password. That's a very, very long method name, but very descriptive of what it does. And you can see that I have the email and the password already passed in as parameters. They just grabbed them out of the text boxes, right? We don't have to worry about that part. So I'm going to pass those in, email and password. And really, if I'm just trying to do like the bare bones basics, that's good enough. But it's not very user-friendly. We want to provide some kind of feedback to the user. Was I able to successfully create your account or not, right? So even though this is technically okay enough, we're going to do a little bit more. We're going to add a listener. So we've seen listeners before, but this is a good opportunity to talk about what a listener really is, right? It's waiting for some kind of an event to happen. Some kind of event to happen. So to understand what kind of events might occur, we have to realize that every time I talk to Firebase, it's communicating with the internet. How have we communicated with the internet in the past? If I wanted to send a request off to the internet, how did I do that in the past? What did I have to use? Like with the APIs, for example. I'm sorry? HTTP request, and that HTTP request was actually wrapped in a particular object, an asynchronous task. We used asynchronous tasks so that it wouldn't interfere with our app while we were waiting for that request. You'll notice that I don't have any asynchronous tasks here explicitly, but I actually do. Anytime I make a call to the Firebase modules, it creates an asynchronous task for you because it has to interact with the internet. But that's code that I don't have to write. It's just automatically part of using Firebase. So I don't have to make an asynchronous task. It already is making one for me. And so these listeners can tell me when certain events happen, and I can code up reactions to those events to give the user information about how well that task is executing or not. Again, remember, asynchronous tasks, I don't know how long they're going to take. And I don't want to sit around and wait for them to finish. So instead what I'll do is I'll define behaviors for various events that might take place. And we're going to use, I typed the wrong thing, add on complete. You saw a bunch of different types of listeners, actually, right? On canceled, if the task gets canceled, on failure, on success, right? Lots of different things that we could do. I'm just going to say on complete. When this task has finished, I want you to tell me about it so that I can look at the results and tell the user what happened. That's what we're doing. So it's expecting at least one parameter, which is the activity that it's listening to, which should just be this. And now we have to define the behavior. This is getting to be kind of long. Let me see if I can clean it up a little bit. Okay. We have to define the behavior, and we're going to use, we've seen this syntax before. Does anybody know what I'm doing when I type something like that in? What is this? With the arrow? Task dot? Not quite. It feels, that's what it would be if we were doing like C. Yeah, but that's not what it is here. It's an anonymous function or a lambda, you might hear it called. I'm defining a function to specify what I want the behavior to be when this event occurs. It's a callback function, right, is another way of thinking about it. When the event is complete, I'm going to use this anonymous function to define what I want to happen. And this task is my input to that function. I have a task that's an input to this function. Okay, the actual behavior is very simple. We're just going to ask the task if it was successful or not. And when I say task, this is quite literally an asynchronous task that we got from Firebase. It created for us on our behalf. So we're asking the task, that Firebase created, were you successful or not? And if you were successful, we want to log the user in. They created the account. We now want to log them in, which is a very simple process. We simply ask Firebase who the current user is. And stick it in a variable. Remember, auth is our access to the authorization module, Firebase authorization module. So we ask them who the current logged in user is, and then we'll update the UI, which is a helper function that's going to do things like display the username and stuff like that. Again, I'm not as concerned about UI stuff today, so I'm just going to, update. I'm surprised that that's the first real mistake that I've made. I was worried I was going to be all over the place today. So if the task was not successful, we'll just fire off a toast. It's that little bubble that pops up on the screen, yeah. Usually at the bottom, but you can position it wherever you want. But typically you see them at the bottom, yes. So the toast needs to know, it needs a context, which again is basically what activity am I in right now. Message. Another user with that email address, if I'm not connected to the internet, right? Can't communicate with the server, yeah. If it does create them, it automatically signs them in as well? Yes, it does. It automatically signs that user in. And the sign-in page is really just, here's your username, right? That's basically all it says. Just as. Nope. Does it have any rules associated with it, like needs to be a certain length or like characters? That's a fantastic question. I believe that you can set those kinds of parameters. Let's see. The documentation for Firebase is also really good. So password rules. Let's see. Stack Overflow. Yep. Currently, no way. No, it's not possible. So there's maybe a downside, I guess. This was in 2016, so it was 3 years ago. It's possible that that's changed since then. Well, and you see now that there's an exception. Here's a more recent one from 2018. Let's see what this says. Not configurable. No. Not configurable, but This suggestion, what this suggestion is implying is that I can take the base functionality and extend it. So I can use Firebase, but then just implement my own strength parameters on the password. Yep. Great question. All right. Where was I? I was here. So I was just going to finish making this toast. So I have the context, I have the error message. I need to specify the length that I want it to be displayed. And then I'll just say .show so that it actually shows up on the screen. What are you mad about? Oh, I forgot a comma. That's a very legitimate thing to be upset about. No, I'm good, but thank you. I appreciate it. And so if I want to update the UI for somebody who's not logged in, I'll just say null. In fact, that's something I forgot to mention. If I ask who the current user is and nobody's logged in, I'm going to get null back. I'll get a null value back. But the update UI function will take that into account. And that's it. Well, actually, there's one final thing to do. It has a progress dialog, which a progress dialog is just like when it pops up that little modal that says, it might have a spinny circle in it or something that just says loading, something like that. And so once we're successfully logged in, we just need to hide that progress dialog, just make it go away. And that's it. That's how we use Firebase to create an account. We still have a couple other things to do, though. Specifically, we need to do the login behavior. There's also the validation email that we could talk about if we have time. The good news is, for logging in, it's actually going to take a very similar format. In fact, it's so similar that I'm going to grab this chunk of code that I just wrote, copy it, come down here to the sign-in, paste it in, and then the code that I really have to change is this. I'm not creating a user now. I am sign in with email and password. And then I should probably, well, I don't even really need to update this, right? Sign in failed. Like that's literally it. It's the same code, just a different method call. Sign in instead of create an account. So that's kind of nice. It really streamlines the process. Notice that it takes, we didn't mention hashing anywhere in here, right? We didn't have to compare any passwords to see if they got it right or not. It takes care of all of that. It takes care of all of that for us on our behalf. Any questions so far? One last thing about authorization, then we'll do something different, is I can send a verification email. So if I'm using email, right, I want somebody to verify that they actually have access to that email, I can send out an email verification. And it is, again, going to look pretty similar to what we had before. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit different. The first thing I need to do is get the user who's currently logged in. So we've seen how to do that, though. Now, the thing that we need to remember, right, is that there may not be anybody logged in. That's a possibility. This can return null. It's going to always return null. So I have to be careful about that when I write the following code. And so that's why you see the question marks here that indicate that this, yes, this could be null. I understand that this could be null, but it's going to be aware of that. The double exclamation mark says you're going to do this thing whether you want to or not. The question mark is a little bit more selective. It says if it's not null, go ahead and do this thing. If it is null, then don't bother because it's not going to work anyway. Yeah. And so we're going to call the send email verification. Notice we're calling it on the user that we got back this time because it's very specific to the user that's logged in. And we're going to do a similar thing here. We're going to add a non-complete listener. And, you know, this is where I could probably start. Oops, I forgot to put my task up here. This is probably where I could start copy pasting.
When you do the question mark again, is that user?
Yes, because if this is null, then send the email verification is also going to potentially not return anything. Calling it on a null object. I mean, it's all chained together, and so if this is null, then neither of these two things can operate. That's what the question marks are protecting against. Yeah.
Like auth and user, are those, you're like importing this object from the Firebase scissors, or like what are those objects?
Auth up here is a Firebase auth object, and I'll show you how to add that to your Gradle file and get it set up. I was going to do that towards the end of class today, but it's basically just a Firebase object that's provided to you to use the service. There's a little bit more setup you have to do than that, though. You can't just start dropping Firebase objects into your code and expecting it to work. There's a little bit more to it than that that I'll show you later. And then the user object is, it's also part of the same API. I grabbed it from the authorization object. And you can find, again, the Firebase documentation is very good. If I spell it right, or even if I don't, doesn't matter. It's very good, so this is a good thing to have handy. You can look it up by what you're using. So here's authentication, and you can take a peek at all the various ways that you can do things. We would be doing, well, this is what we're doing right now, email link authentication. But yeah, I will definitely show you how to set up the Firebase properly before we leave here today. And so this is where we would just do another, if task successful, this business here that we've already done twice now. The only difference that I would do this time around is that I don't need to update the UI. I just need to display a message. So instead of doing that, I'll just send a toast out either way. If it was successful, I'll just say a message that says email was sent, and then email verification.
So is this email verification thing, this is like an extra thing after you're logged in, right? It won't stop.
Yeah, after you have an account. You have to have an account, right?
Yeah.
You have to have, it will not stop you. That is correct.
It's like, it's just for your knowledge.
You can't.
Once every 3 months.
So what you can do, right, like I can't stop somebody from creating an account based on this, but I can stop them from using other parts of my app based on this.
You could like check.
You can check to see if they've verified their email or not before allowing them to access different parts of your app. Is what you could do if you wanted to. But this will send an email to whatever email address was registered. Again, that's something that we no longer have to worry about. We don't have to. Where does it come from? It comes from Firebase. I think it says Firebase right on the subject line. Yeah. And there's a link in there that you click to verify. I mean, we've all been through that process, right? It's what you would expect. Cool. And so yeah, I mean, later on, if you want to check the here's how you would grab that, right? User.isEmailVerified will tell you whether or not they verified that email address. So where's all this information stored? That's something to be thinking about as well. These are your users after all, and you do owe them at least some reasonable semblance of privacy for the most part. Or maybe you don't, but I don't know. Most applications would like to provide some privacy controls, some security controls. It's all online. Again, remember, every time I'm doing stuff like this, I'm making a request that's getting sent out online to grab this information. Any questions about authorization before we look at a different module? Yeah, what's up? What button is this? This is a button to send a verification email. So if they have already verified, it will disable it because they don't need to send one. If they haven't already verified, it will enable it. so they can send it.
So then with this, or I guess, would it be up to us to, I guess, decide, you know, if this is a button that's just like grayed out, or if like disappears completely, or like the Firebase?
Well, when you set the is-enabled property to false, it grays the button out for you automatically. That's just part of the Android UI.
It's a Firebase.
No, the Android UI does that. That's not even a Firebase thing. That's, you can do that to any button you want. If you set it to.
That button running that send verification email function, right?
I'm sorry?
You have that button.
Yes. Yes. In fact, this is a good thing to point out as well. I've got a lot of buttons. I don't know if I have the UI up still. Let me see how far I can get in here before it breaks. Oh, well, not very far. Yeah, this was before I finished writing the code. I could relaunch it, but yeah, okay. Anyhow, I've got 4 buttons, one for signing in, one for creating an account, one for signing out, and one for verifying your email. And it could be tempting to create one separate listener for each of those. But this app has actually done a great job of consolidating that process. You'll notice that they set the on-click listener to this, which seems a little strange. That's not how we're used to seeing it. This is a place where we might see like another anonymous function to dictate what we want that button behavior to be. But later on in the code, if I can find it, is a function called, did I go the wrong way? I went the wrong way, sorry. No, I didn't. I'll just search for it. Called onClick. So if you have this function, it'll be used as the onClick listener for a particular button, and then it just checks the ID of the button to determine what function should be called for each button. So I have one listener for all 4 buttons, and it really greatly consolidates the code.
I forgot where it was in the code, but like one more time, it had question mark dot. I didn't understand.
Oh,
I didn't understand, like, usually the question mark comes after an object, but I didn't get that.
Yeah, so that's a good question.
Yeah,
Maybe it would help if I typed it like this, because it's a little bit more accurate. Question mark, and then move that to the next line.
Yeah.
But actually, the compiler doesn't like that.
Well, like, that's like all one line.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yep. If you end it with a question mark, it thinks that the line is over. That's why the question mark's been moved to the next line. Good question. Any other questions before I take a look at another module? So the module I want to look at next is let me pull up my slides actually, storage. All right, this one's typically used for storing user-generated files, a lot of times like profile pictures, things like that, that people can upload. And it provides links, so I can download them too. If I want to, I can provide a link and download the file. And so we've got another simple app. Basically, it does exactly what you would expect. It allows you to pick a photo on your phone and upload it, and then it also has another screen that lets you download the. I'm sorry?
It's free for like how much?
It's free, but there are limits on how much space and bandwidth you can use under the free plan. We can take a look at that when I show you the setup process a little bit later. So let's do a little demo here. We're not going to do both the upload and the download. I think we're just going to do the, which one did I decide to do? The download part. But we can still take a look at the upload part just for completion's sake. If I want to upload a photo, here's the code that's going to do that. But actually, before we talk about that, let's talk about something different real quick, because this is another useful thing for you to know. If I want to upload something, what usually happens first is I have a button that pulls up my file system, right? And I can browse through all my files and find the file that I want. So we can do that on Android too. That's what this code is doing for us. It's starting this content resolver. That's what it's called. That's what pops up the little window with all of your folders and files on there. That's not unique to Firebase. That's just an Android thing that's provided that will pop up that window. So if you need to browse your file system on your phone through an app, you can fire up this content resolver. This is where the file will be stored when they pick it. So whenever they pick a file, the path to that file will be stored here, and then there has to be permissions involved to access the file system as well. But this is the code that will grab that, and then we just simply pass the location of that file to this upload function, which has already been completed. I'm not going to code this one up. I'll code the download one up in just a second. The way that we access the storage is through this storage reference, which is set in very much a similar way to the auth variable that we used in the previous example. I grab it from Firebase. It's set up here in the onCreate. I should have shown that first. I'm sorry. Actually, it's not here. I need to put it in. Let's do it. I'll code that up. That's just a one-liner. That would be val storage ref, or I don't even need that. I just need to say storage ref equals Firebase storage dot get instance dot reference. So it's a reference to my online storage. And then when I come back down here, you can see that I can specify a path. So I'm dealing with photos, and this is literally going to create a folder called photos in my storage online if it doesn't exist. Or if it does exist, it's just going to make sure that it stores the file in that folder. It'll take care of all of that for me. So we grab the path. Remember, this is the file path that we grabbed from the context, the content resolver up here. So I'm passing that path to the photo folder to the storage reference. This gives me back an object, which is a reference to the photo that's being uploaded. And so I call put file on that. And what we can do for uploading and downloading too is show a progress bar. So that's what a lot of this code has to do. This is another situation where if all I want to do is upload the photo, actually I could stop here and just do this. If all I want to do is just straight upload the photo, I can just do that and move on with my life. I don't have to do everything that comes after it, but we like to provide information to the user about what's happening. And so the code that comes after this is setting up a progress bar so that users can see how the upload is progressing or download. You've probably seen this on your phone. If you upload something or you download something, where does it show up? It doesn't show up in the app. It shows up at that bar at the top that you swipe down on. Do I have an emulator up? If I'm downloading something, it usually shows up, come on, it usually shows up here, right? This is called your notifications tray. So if I want to put something in here, I can. I have to put a notification in here. And so that's what they do. They show the progress notification by passing in how many bytes have been transferred, so what's my current progress, and the total bytes, which they get from this snapshot object, which again is just part of this progress listener. So it's another event. It's another event that we're listening for. This listener is going to fire periodically, take a snapshot of the task, say here's the number of bytes you've uploaded out of the total, and I can pass that to this notification so that it updates the progress bar. Any questions about that? This is how you can set up a progress bar if you need to do that in your own code. Down here, we've got basically a way to, you see the comments actually explain, forward any exceptions. So if something goes wrong in the middle, I've got this code to check to see if the task has failed and throw an exception. That's all that section is doing, actually. And then down here, we've got, all right, if the file is successfully completed, I'm going to broadcast that it finished and then show that the notification that it is finished. So the progress bar will go away, and I'll just show that the notification is finished. I'm going to talk about that broadcast in a second. Let me just finish up with the failure down here. Come on, mouse. With the failure stuff down here, it's actually doing the exact same thing. Broadcast that it finished, show a finished notification. I know this looks like a lot, but consider that it's really just specifying the different possible outcomes that can happen. Success, failure, or the continue is for if it fails in the middle somewhere. Whereas failure would be if it fails, typically this will fire at the end. Would be the distinction between those two. We haven't talked about broadcasts yet, and I don't want to confuse this topic too much, but a broadcast, consider if I'm using an app and I want to, I'm sure this has happened to you. You've been using an app and something happens that boots you into another app. It kicks you out into another app. A lot of times that happens as a result of a broadcast. So this broadcast would say, hey, or in this case I'm uploading, but we could do the opposite. We could say, I just downloaded a picture. I'm going to broadcast out that fact that I just downloaded this picture. And what that might do is say, oh, do you want to open your photo gallery and look at this picture? That's what the broadcast is for, to allow you to interact with the result of this process. A broadcast is almost always going to occur at the end of some task, at the end of some action that has taken place, to notify to notify other applications that something has occurred that they may want to participate in. Again, though, just to reiterate, the Firebase stuff is really this. This stuff here, that's what's using Firebase. Everything else, the listeners on down, that's not unique to Firebase at all. That is just handling any kinds of errors and things that might happen during the upload process. Yes?
If it fails in the middle of the download, why would you want to continue, or what would you continue with?
Excuse me. Continue with task is actually not saying that it should continue. In fact, you can see that it throws an exception, so that's going to cause it to stop anyway. But the problem is that here we're taking periodic snapshots so that we can update the progress bar. And so if we don't do a continue with task here, we may not notice that anything has failed until later on in the process, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So this is trying to catch anything that could happen in the middle and forward that so that you can deal with those exceptions later if you need to. It's actually not strictly necessary. You could remove this chunk and it will still be perfectly happy. The important ones are the success and failure, so that you can notify the user that it's over by updating the notifications. But let's take a look at downloading real quick. I do want to write a little code over on the download side. It actually looks a lot different than what we just looked at. So it's already gotten started for us. Again, we have another progress bar. We're going to keep tabs on how much has been downloaded from this process. And so what we need to do, you can see the first thing that it does is it gets a stream. Are you guys familiar with streams? So when are streams introduced? Probably like 132 would be the first time you would see them, I would think. Text stream, yeah. I mean, I bet you see them in 332. That would make a lot of sense. A stream is really just a series of bytes, series of binary data coming at you, right? That's what a stream is. So it's a way of dealing with input and output. In this case, we're dealing with a stream, which we know is a photograph, but really could be anything. We know it's a picture. So the stream is the bytes of the photo coming down to us from the website. So I've got my storage ref. That's Firebase. .child download path, that's the path of the picture that I'm grabbing from Firebase again. And the stream is, all right, get me a byte by byte representation of that picture. This will start the download. And again, you can see I've got a lambda started here that we need to fill out. What do we actually want to happen? How do we update the progress bar, basically, is what we're talking about here. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a variable to represent the number of bytes that I've already downloaded. I'm sorry, that's the total number of bytes. So what's the total size of the picture? And then I'll make another one for representing the bytes that I've already downloaded. We're going to start it at 0 because I haven't downloaded anything yet. I haven't actually made a request yet to download anything. I have the stream, but I actually have to make a formal request to that stream to get data out of it. And I haven't done that yet. But soon, in fact, in a line or two, we'll do exactly that. I'm going to create a buffer. The buffer is just to hold the data that I'm pulling in from the stream. It's a destination, right? I'm going to pull in some bytes from the stream. Again, everything is bytes. So I'm going to treat this as a byte array of size 1024. So what does that mean? That means I'm going to pull down this photo 1 kilobyte at a time. If I wanted to try to pull down bigger chunks, I could. You just have to make sure that you're aware of the bandwidth limitations of the network that you're on, right? Here we go. The next line, we're going to start reading some data. I have my input stream, and I'm going to call read on it and put those values in the buffer. Excuse me. This variable size that I created will tell me how many bytes were actually read. So the buffer has room for a kilobyte, but there may not be a kilobyte's worth of stuff to read, or there might be an internet problem, or there might be something like that going on. So the size variable will tell me how many bytes were actually read and put into the buffer. And I need to repeat this process. I need to read in all of the bytes until there aren't any more. So when I run out of things to read, it's going to give me back a -1. Size will be -1. So while size is not -1, I'm going to keep pulling more and more bytes out of the buffer and updating my progress bar. So I'll say bytes downloaded is equal to size, but we're going to make it into a long, since that's what the progress bar wants. The progress bar wants a long. This should be plus equals, I'm sorry. So I'm going to keep a running tally of how many bytes I've downloaded. I'm going to pass that number into the progress bar, show progress notification. The first thing that it wants is a label. What should the progress bar say? What should the label on that progress bar be? We're going to get that from our resources. Capital R is how I access resources, right? String progress downloading. Yeah, what's up?
In like some of the first labs,
Uh-huh.
like layout files,
Yeah.
have like at string,
Yeah.
class, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I would always just replace them with a literal string and give me warnings.
It does
where
give
are
you
those
warnings.
strings even located?
Yeah, so anytime you use our variable, that's your resources folder. So you have the resource, that's where your layouts go, but there's another folder down here called values. And inside of there is a file called strings. So it really does not want you to hard code any strings into. I'm sure, yeah, it does work. But Android really does not want you to hard code any strings into your app. They want you to store them all in this XML file and then reference them the way that I just did, actually. So we can find the one for progress downloading. It just says downloading ... Oh, you know, that's about right. The reason that they want you to do that is because then you can reuse strings a lot easier across your application. That's the reason why. So I'm just passing in the label, and I'll pass in the bytes that are downloaded so that it knows how to draw the progress bar and the total number of bytes so that it can specify how filled up that progress bar should be. And then I'll read in another one, size equals input stream dot read. And then once I'm done, all I have to do is close the stream. Okay. You can see that, like, for the upload, I have a success listener and a failure listener down here just to broadcast when it's finished, so that anybody can do whatever they want with it once it's finished. I can show, here's the notification that you can show, right? But this code here is what's actually downloading the photo and sticking it into a buffer. Sticking it into that buffer. Any questions? Any questions? Yeah, what's up?
Why don't you just specify that you're reading it into the buffer in the while loop?
Did I skip it? I skipped a thing. Thank you.
You also made a slight typo in the string.
Yep. Thanks. Cool. All right. Any other questions? This is actually all I had for the storage piece, but I still got one more module left, which is the Firestore. That's a little bit different. Any questions? Let's look at Firestore. Last but certainly not least, this is a database as a service. So basically, they take care of setting up a database for you and then provide an API that you can access that database with. It's not a SQL database. It's something called NoSQL. In fact, it's closer to a database that you may or may not have heard of or interacted with called MongoDB. It's not Mongo. Mongo is a trademarked, registered name. They cannot claim that it's Mongo, but it's like basically Mongo is what it is. And the nice thing about it is it's fast and it's designed to scale very quickly. So if I have lots of people using my app, I don't need to worry about if my database is going to crumble under the weight. I just pay Google more money and they make sure that my database is going to keep up with the demand. That's what Firestore is good for. But let's take a look at the structure. Instead of dealing with tables with rows and columns, we're dealing with documents that look a lot like JSON. In fact, this could very easily pass as JSON. I've got key value pairs. I can embed documents inside of documents, which we actually see here, right? Got a document inside of a document. There are additional data types. So JSON doesn't really have array support, but I can use arrays here if I want to with square brackets. So that's an additional feature that's been added to these particular documents. There's also a limitation for this. You can only have up to 1 megabyte worth of data in a single document, which is not it's not really that much of a limitation. In practice, I've never gotten anywhere close to hitting that ceiling. So documents are kind of like the rows. If you have to make an analogy between SQL database like we did with SQLite and Firestore. Documents are kind of like the rows, and then collections are kind of like tables. Not really, but kind of like tables. It's a collection of documents. It's a collection of documents. Now, what makes things even more confusing, although useful, extremely useful, it's possible to have collections of documents inside of other documents. In fact, we're going to see an example of this when I take a look at the final app of today. But what's interesting to note is the data is really schemaless. So with SQLite, like the examples that we looked at last week, I have to specify, here's the name of my table, here's all the columns of my table, and the data types that I want those columns to have. And then I expect all data coming in to follow that format. That's not true here. I'm not expecting any data types. I'm not expecting any names. I can actually put documents into a collection that have nothing in common at all, that look totally different. So it's not going to verify that my data has a consistent structure. In other words, however, it's still good if your data has a consistent structure. It just makes life easier. It makes your program simpler and more straightforward. What it really is doing is putting the onus on us as programmers now to make sure that all the data that we are dealing with in our app follows the same structure. Yes?
With MongoDB, they have an interface called Mongoose that basically makes it into a SQL database, more or less. You define templates for the objects. Is there anything like that for Firebase?
Not that I'm aware of. It could exist, but I have not heard of it. I actually didn't even know about Mongoose. That's interesting.
Think like template documents that are basically like the
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Really here though, it's on the app, right, to verify, to make sure that all data is following the same format. And so what I want to do is take a look at one last app. It's a restaurant app. So basically the idea is it's got a list of restaurants. It does a search functionality thing. I'm not even worried about that. I'm more worried about the ratings part. I can pick a restaurant, and as a user, if I log in, I can submit a rating for that restaurant, which is like a like a 1 to 5 star rating, and then I can put a little text review if I want to that explains why I rated it the way that I did. And we want to store those ratings. And we want to compute things like what's the average rating for a particular restaurant. We want to do stuff like that with this app. So we're going to take a look at one final piece of code here. All right. So this is a restaurant detail activity, and I can't show you the app because it's not fully functional. Although it might actually work as well as I need it to. I might start it in the background real quick and see. What? Okay, that was weird. Anyway, never mind. So if I have a list of restaurants, I get to this code if I click on one, right? Or if I tap one. It pulls up the name of the restaurant, and then it's got a place for me to leave a review. That's where we're at in this app. Okay? And so I want to collect that information and save it to the database. Save it to the Firestore database. So notice that when we get to this app, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. Let me just stick with the comments that I put in here to help me out. First thing that we're going to do is grab an instance of Firestore, and this is like the same thing that we did for the other two. We're just going to grab a Firebase. If I can spell it properly, Firebase firestore.getInstance. It already knows what we want. We did the same thing for the other ones, right? Nothing different here. We're now going to grab the restaurant information for this restaurant. And you can see that one of the things that it does is we have a restaurant ID that gets passed to us. So when I click on that button, it's passing me a unique number that represents this restaurant ID. You can think of it like the primary key, What is the primary key for this restaurant? And now what I want to do is look up that restaurant in my database and get all of the information that I have for that restaurant out of the database. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to get a reference to this restaurant. We're making a query, or we're about to make a query, basically. So I'm going to make a variable, or set a variable rather, firestore.collection. Remember, what's a collection again? Collection of documents, right? Collection of documents. So I'm telling it what collection I want to query. I'm basically specifying the table. If this were SQL, right? This would be, I want to pull something out of the restaurant table, right? And then I'll say, let me move to the next line if I can. And then I'll say, all right, which document do you want to get out of the restaurant's table? I want to get the document that has this restaurant ID. This is a lookup by primary key, or the Firestore equivalent of a lookup by primary key. Go to the restaurant's collection, find the restaurant that has this ID number, and give it back to me. Now, within every restaurant, we actually have a collection, another collection. So I've got a collection of documents with another collection inside of them, and that collection is used to store all of the ratings. So I've got a ratings collection inside of each restaurant document. And so if I want to get the ratings information out, I can query that restaurant document and pull out the ratings information, which is what we're going to do. I'm going to make a ratings query. I'm going to use my restaurant reference, and I'm going to run through a similar process. Go find the collection within this document called ratings. Okay, we're not done yet. I want to sort them. So order these by time. I want to see the most recent ones first. And I can even specify the order that I want by including an additional parameter here, query direction. Descending means give me the most recent one and then work your way back. And then last, there could be a lot of reviews, right? But for our purposes, we'll just say I only want 50. I'm just going to limit myself to 50. It's a little arbitrary. It's not necessary. But it's showing off some of the ways that you can use queries to manipulate the data and get the results back that you want. So here we've already made actually 2 queries into our Firestore database. 2 queries. One to get the restaurant based on the restaurant ID, and then one to get the ratings out of that restaurant document. So the other thing to look at would be the opposite direction. How do I take new information and put it into the database? So we can take a look at that next. If I scroll down, there's a function called add rating. So this has a text box or two that you can use to excuse me. Whoops. Here it is. This is what I'm looking for. Has a text box and stuff that you can use to add your comments and everything. We're assuming that they've already done that. And so here is a reference to the restaurant that we are rating. And then this is a rating object. We actually have a model for this over here with the user ID and username of the person who made the rating, the actual rating, which is a numeric value, and then the text, any comments that they left as part of the rating. So we're going to assume that that code's already hooked up and working. That's just UI code. So I want to take this rating and store it in this document. That's our next goal. I want to put this rating into the database. In order to do that, we have to make something called a transaction. A transaction is really just kind of like what it sounds. It's me having an interaction with the database. Just having an interaction with the database. So I'm typing return, but this might be one of the longest return statements that you ever see. Probably not, actually. We might see longer ones even in this class. There's my Firestore. So I'm talking to the database. I want to start a new transaction. And inside of the transaction is where I'm going to specify things like, what do I want the data to be? What do I want the key value pairs to be? How do I want to map this data? So that's what's coming up next. I'm going to create another Lambda for this, because we have some work to do. I just got a new rating, so I need to do things like update the overall rating of the restaurant. If the restaurant had a 1-star rating before and I just gave it a 5-star rating, I need to update that to reflect the fact that now the total rating is at 2.5 stars, right? This is where stuff like that could happen. So we're going to do a little bit of math here. One of the things that we're going to do first, this is a document reference, which is quite literally data that was pulled out of the database. It's not very easy for me to work with. It would be easier for me to work with if I had it in the form of my model, my restaurant model. So I want to take this document that I pulled out of the database and I want to map it to a Kotlin object, a Java object. So that's actually the first thing that we're going to, I just ran the debugger on accident, didn't mean to do that. That's the first thing that we're going to do, is take this JSON document, basically, and turn it into a restaurant object. So we're going to grab the restaurant dot to objects. Why isn't this working? Transaction, I mistyped it, that's why. Forgot a C. And now I have to specify what I want the new type to be. We've actually seen this code before. I'm just trying to remember where we saw it. We've seen something similar to this before, though. Why are you unhappy with me? Did it just, wait, what? All right, tell me why you're upset. Do I need to do that? Expected type mismatch. Required task found task. What happened? Yeah, it's unit versus void. What did I do wrong here? I must have skipped a step, but I am drawing a blank on which step I have skipped. Or is it a syntax thing, maybe? That doesn't seem right. Well, we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to cheat real quick and look up what I did wrong. In fact, I want to make sure we have enough time to get to the setup stuff. Yeah, I know. Kotlin, detail activity. What did I do wrong? Tell me. That looks like what I did. Just mad at me. Oh, I actually might know what I did wrong, perhaps. Let me see. Does this make you happy? Yep. It was mad because this has a return type of null, and I did not specify that it needed to return null. That's why it was angry at me. Sorry about that. I knew that, I just didn't think of it when I needed to. That's my bad. All right. I got 10 minutes left. All right, this is good. I have just enough time to finish up what I wanted to do. So this is now a restaurant object, right? I took the JSON, I converted it into a restaurant object, which is good because what I want to do is I want to update some of the fields of this restaurant object, like the number of ratings and the average rating. I need to recompute those now because I have a new rating that's just come in. So I need to update those values. So now that I have that restaurant object, I can update those values. This is actually not Firebase related at all, really. It's more about just keeping our app consistent. So I'm going to create a variable, new number of ratings, which is equal to restaurant num ratings plus 1. So I've just made a new rating, so there's one more than what used to be there. I'm going to make, I have to recompute the average rating. So the old average is going to be, oh, hey, restaurant average rating, come on now, times restaurant number of ratings. And then I'll make the new average equal to the old average plus the new rating divided by the new number of ratings. That's just a little bit of arithmetic that needed to happen. Why are you mad at me? Oh, okay. Does anybody understand? Well, you can't even probably read this, but does anybody understand? It says only safe or non-null asserted calls are allowed. Does anybody know what that means?
Yeah, I mean, in that I pressed option enter and it either had a question mark or a double exclamation mark.
Okay, there's another way that you can solve this problem, though. Let me show you a third option. You're absolutely right. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, so what's the problem? The problem is that I tried to convert this into a restaurant object, but what if it didn't work? Then this might be null. Yeah. Or something like this. If restaurant equals null, throw exception. Parentheses, yeah, I know. I skipped that. Oh, come on. What are you doing to me? And you'll notice that it's actually smart enough to detect that that I've done that check, and that's enough to make it happy. Java wouldn't do that, by the way. Java would not. Although Java also wouldn't complain about calls like this either. It would just try to do them and then fail. All right. We're actually like 2 or 3 lines away from wrapping this up. Excuse me. I'm going to update the number of ratings to the new number of ratings. I'm going to update the average rating to the new average rating that I just computed. And now I have to do the part where I actually do the insertion to the database. All of this stuff was just arithmetic to make the app work the way I want it to. The database stuff I do through the transaction. So I say transaction.set. I have a reference to my old document called restaurant ref. It's up here. This is a reference to the document as it was before. So if I want to change that value, I pass in the reference and the updated object. And it will take that and update that document accordingly. The ratings are a little bit different because those go inside of a collection that's inside of the document. But I have a ratings reference that I did way back here at the top. Don't I? Where did that? Oh, wait, hang on. Rating ref. It was created at the beginning of this function. So I have a reference to that collection as well. So I'll set the ratings ref. Is it rating ref? Yeah, to the new rating. And we're done. So you can ignore all the math if you want to. That's okay. I'm not concerned about whether you know how to compute averages. I'm more concerned about the database interaction piece. I started a transaction, right? And then to actually set the values, I had to have a reference to the documents that I wanted to change. I pass in new objects. Notice those are Kotlin objects, right? Restaurant and rating are Kotlin objects. I pass those in. I specify the reference that I want them to be associated with. It will automatically convert those into JSON, where the field names of my objects become the keys of my JSON document. So we're creating a mapping between the JSON and the object. And then the values obviously become the values. And then ship that off to the database. I only have 4 minutes left, which is not enough time to show you how to set up Firebase. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that at the beginning of Studio on Thursday, because I don't want to cut that short. It's important. But here's something that I do want to make you aware of before we leave today. For the Studio and also the third assignment, we're going to ask you to use some Firebase stuff. And you might want to use some Firebase stuff on your final project as well, perhaps. In order to do that, you need a Google account. So if you already have a Google account, you're good to go. But if you don't have a Google account, please consider signing up for a Google account sometime between now and Thursday, because what I wanted to show you and ran out of time to do, but we'll do so on Thursday, is the Firebase console, which has a list of all of my Firebase projects. You can see the ones that we just played around with. The authorization, the storage, and the Firestore app are all on here. On Thursday, I'll run you through how to set stuff up in here and make sure that your Firebase app is up and running. Are there any questions with the last couple minutes that we have for today? We covered a lot of ground today. We did a lot of stuff today. If you have any questions, please let me know. All right, cool. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it up, and I'll see you back on Thursday. Yes, I'll be right over. Let me just pack up my stuff.